They were supposed to be back by Sunday. That's what Emily's mum remembered most. It wasn't just the goodbye hug or the smile that lingered too long. No, it was that promise. "We'll be back by Sunday evening, Mum, don't worry." And then they were gone. Emily Reyes and her fiancé, Mark Holloway, had planned the weekend trip for months. They were nature lovers, backpackers who felt more at home under a canopy of stars than under a roof. So a camping trip deep in Washington's Olympic National Forest didn't feel like a risk, not for them. They had done it before, plenty of times. It was their reset button, as Emily once put it. But that time, they didn't come back. When Sunday passed without a call or text, Emily's mother thought maybe they had stayed an extra night. But when Monday turned into Tuesday, panic settled in. By Wednesday, local authorities had launched a formal search. For weeks, hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, and K9 units swept across the dense forest trails, the muddy creek beds, the remote campsites. But there was no trace, no tent, no fire pit, no backpacks, no tire tracks where their car should have been. They'd vanished. The news spread fast. 2 young hikers, engaged to be married, swallowed whole by the forest. Every year it happens, people said. The woods are unforgiving. But there was something off about this case. The weather had been calm that weekend. They were experienced. Their route was logged. Nothing made sense. And then, after a month of nothing, the case went cold. Emily's parents didn't accept it. They pushed. They went back to the woods themselves for months. They held vigils, passed out flyers, even hired a private investigator named Dale Murrow, a former cop with a face like weathered stone and a voice like gravel. But after 2 years, even he gave up, and now it was year 4. That summer, the forest was unusually dry. Fires had been breaking out all along the west coast, and Olympic wasn't spared. A wildfire, triggered by a lightning strike, swept through an uncharted stretch near Grey Elk Ridge, far from the usual campsites. When firefighters began digging containment lines near a dry creek bed, one of them spotted something white sticking out of the dirt. It looked like bone. They called it in. What followed was a slow, methodical excavation. First, the bone was confirmed human. Then, deeper, torn fabric, charred remnants of a backpack strap, a ring, a gold engagement band with an emerald stone. Emily's. 4 years of silence, and suddenly she was back, at least part of her. Detective Nora Mendez, who had taken over cold cases just 6 months prior, found herself staring at photos of remains discovered in a place that had never been searched before. A place not listed on Emily and Mark's planned route. A place that wasn't supposed to be accessible at all. It raised more questions than it answered. How did they end up there? Why hadn't searchers found them earlier? And the biggest question of all, where was Mark? Because only one body had been found, and right next to Emily's remains, buried beneath a collapsed tree trunk, was something even stranger. A journal, soaked, half-burned, and almost illegible. But it was real, and it wasn't Emily's handwriting. Detective Nora Mendez kept her gloves on longer than she needed to. The journal sat on her desk under a thin sheet of plastic, the pages fragile like dead leaves. She didn't know what she expected when she picked it up. Some scrawled survival, notes, a confession, a goodbye letter. What she got instead was a sentence on the first readable page that made her skin crawl. "We shouldn't have followed them. I told her not to. I told her." It wasn't dated, it wasn't signed, but the penmanship was sharp, stressed, like someone writing fast under pressure. She had the lab-run tests. The handwriting didn't match Emily's, and when they pulled Mark Holloway's records, it wasn't a match either, not even close. So who wrote it? And more importantly, who were them? Nora kept turning the pages. Some were burned, others soaked in water or mud, but every few leaves a chilling sentence would stand out, dark and heavy. The fire wasn't natural. "They watch us at night, eyes between the trees." Emily screamed. They didn't care. "We aren't alone out here." She closed the journal, took a breath. This wasn't just a couple that got lost or attacked by a bear. This was something else, something worse. The news about the discovery hadn't been released to the public yet. Nora wanted to keep it that way. She didn't need conspiracy theories or ghost hunters clogging up the investigation. But she did call Emily's parents. When Mrs. Reyes arrived at the station, she was quiet, too quiet, like something inside her had been waiting for this for years and now didn't know how to react. She looked older than Nora remembered, shrunken, tired. Her hands trembled when Nora passed her the emerald ring. She didn't cry. She just whispered. She never took it off. Not once. Nora didn't mention the journal. Not yet. She needed more time. The next step was the site itself. By the time she reached Grey Elk Ridge, the fire had died down and the air was thick with ash and silence. Crime scene tape fluttered weakly in the breeze. A forensics team had set up temporary lights and a tent over the area. Nora walked the perimeter with Dale Murrow, the private investigator Emily's parents had once hired. He'd shown up uninvited, but she let it slide. His eyes carried years of unfinished work. "They were found here?" he asked, kneeling beside the scorched pit. Nora nodded. Emily was, no sign of Mark yet. Murrow narrowed his eyes at the tree line. "You ever heard the local rumors about this part of the forest? About ghosts and missing hikers?" "Sure. Campfire stories. Some aren't." "Just stories," he said, his voice low. "You know how many disappearances have happened within 10 miles of this ridge in the last 20 years? Probably more than I'd like to know. 37. She looked at him. 37 people vanished between 2001 and now. Most never found. Same general area, same kind of profile. Campers, hikers, couples. Nora folded her arms. "So you think what? A serial killer's been camping out here for decades?" "I don't know what I think," Murrow said, "but this forest has secrets, and now you've stirred one of them up." She was about to respond when one of the forensics techs called out, "Detective, you'll want to see this." They followed the voice toward a shallow slope, just 50 feet from where Emily's remains had been uncovered. A new dig site had started. Half buried in ash and pine needles was another body. Not fresh, but not as old as Emily's either. Male. No wallet, no ID, a torn shirt, and a knife wound deep in the ribs. Nora's heart kicked. Could it be Mark? But then the tech pulled something else from the body's pocket. A scrap of paper burned at the edges. Written on it, in the same sharp handwriting as the journal, were 3 words. "They're still here." They flew the new body out by chopper just before sundown. Nora stayed behind, pacing the now widened perimeter of the crime scene while the forensics team finished cataloguing every broken twig and burnt footprint. The forest was too quiet again. Even with the hum of generators and low chatter of techs, something about the silence between the trees made the hairs on her neck stand up. Dale Murrow stood with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the place where the second body had been found. His voice was almost a whisper. "That wasn't Mark." Nora turned to him. "How can you be sure?" "I've seen his records. Mark had a plate in his left ankle from a climbing accident in 2016. No plate in this guy's body. You remembered that detail. I didn't forget a damn thing about this case." Nora looked down at the dirt. One body confirmed. To be Emily, the other. A male victim with a knife wound and a cryptic note. The injuries weren't consistent with an animal attack. This was violence, human violence. And now the puzzle had more pieces, but none were fitting together. She couldn't shake the voice in her head, the words from that burned journal. We shouldn't have followed them. The next morning she was back at her office with 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for Dale. They reviewed the autopsy results on Emily's remains, fractures to the skull, possible blunt force trauma. Not consistent with falling or fire. Someone had attacked her. That was now confirmed. "So someone killed her," Dale muttered, his tone grim. "Buried her in the middle of nowhere. Then what? Just kept living out here for 4 years." "Or maybe," Nora said slowly, "they were trapped out here." Dale frowned. "You think whoever wrote that journal was being held? Maybe. Or hiding. Think about it. Those notes read like someone spiraling, desperate, scared. What if there's something or someone still in those woods? Dale didn't respond right away. He just leaned back in the chair, his face unreadable. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her something. A flash drive. What's this? Old interviews. Locals who came forward after Emily and Mark vanished. Most of them were dismissed. Too wild, not reliable. But a couple of them mentioned the same thing. What thing? He met her eyes. The Watchers. Nora blinked. Excuse me? Locals say there are things in the forest, people who live out there, off-grid. No names, no contact, no laws. They watch anyone who enters. Sometimes they let you leave. Sometimes they don't. She exhaled slowly. Like some kind of cult. Could be. Or worse. That night, Nora listened to the recordings on the flash drive. Most were filled with background noise. Wind, birds, the rustle of trees. But then one stood out. An old man named Garrett Price, interviewed 2 years after the disappearance. You don't go past Grey Elk Ridge, he said, voice shaking. They'll know. They'll know. The Watchers. They don't like being seen, don't like strangers sniffing around their land. Who are they? The interviewer asked. Ain't nobody knows, just shadows in the trees. At night you can see the fires, hear the whistles. And if you're unlucky, they'll see you. And then? You never leave. Nora slammed her laptop shut. It was late. The office was empty. But suddenly she didn't feel alone. The lights above her flickered once, then steadied. The hum of the air conditioner kicked on. Nothing unusual. But her phone buzzed on the desk. No caller ID, just one message. Stop digging. Her blood ran cold. She looked toward her office window. Across the street, through the darkened glass, she thought, just for a second, she saw someone standing beneath the street lamp. Still. Watching. And then they were gone. Nora didn't go home that night. She stayed in the precinct, locked her office door and kept the lights low. She didn't want to be seen. Not until she figured out who was trying to intimidate her. She traced the number that sent the message. It bounced through 3 dummy lines before disappearing into an untraceable cloud service. Professional. Whoever sent it didn't want to be found. The next morning, she returned to the evidence room and pulled the journal again. This time, she didn't flip through it like a detective. She read it like a survivor. The handwriting grew more erratic, page by page, words becoming jagged and frantic. Somewhere around the last few entries, one phrase appeared repeatedly, scratched over, itself in thick, shaking pen. They wear faces. They wear faces. They wear our faces. She shivered. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it did, and she just didn't want it to. She needed answers. Real ones. Not the whispers. Not the myths. Not more theories from retired men and drunk campers. So she made a decision. She would go into the woods, but she wouldn't go alone. By 4 p.m., Dale Murrow was standing next to her SUV, arms crossed, holding a heavy-duty backpack and a sidearm. You sure about this? He asked. No, but I need to know what happened out there. They left phones behind, took analog maps, gear, and a satellite beacon. No GPS tracking, no tech they couldn't trust. Just them, the tools, and the woods. They parked the car 2 miles from the dig site and hiked in on foot, past the yellow tape, past the search perimeter, deeper than anyone from law enforcement had gone before. At first, the trail felt like any other. Pines stretched high. Above, needles crunching beneath their boots, sun breaking through the canopy in golden rays. But after an hour, things changed. No birds, no wind, no sound at all. It was like the forest had swallowed every trace of life. And then they saw it. A totem, tall, made from twisted sticks and bound in animal sinew, stuck into the earth like a warning post. Small bones dangled from it on twine, not animal, human. Dale stepped closer. What the hell is this? A boundary, Nora said softly. A line we're not supposed to cross. But they did. Another half-mile in, they reached a clearing. At its center was a charred fire pit, and around it several flat stones, each engraved with hand-carved symbols, nothing she recognized. At the far end of the clearing stood a crude wooden structure. Not a house, not a tent. Something in between. Built from logs and hide, The kind of thing people make when they've been away from civilization too long. Nora's hand went to her holster. This wasn't here during the original searches. Because they didn't want it found, Dale muttered. Inside the structure it was dark and damp. The walls were lined with torn scraps of clothing, jackets, shirts, even a wedding veil, stained with mud and dried blood. And in the center of the floor, set neatly in a rusted metal pan, was a fresh apple, still red, still shiny, like it had been placed there just hours before. Nora crouched beside it, heart thudding. Someone was just here. Dale backed toward the door. Then we need to leave, now. But just as he turned, a sound echoed through the forest. A whistle, not a bird, not the wind. A long, high-pitched whistle that cut through the air like a blade, then another, and another, from all directions. They weren't alone. Dale drew his gun. We move. Now. They ran. Branches clawed at their arms, roots threatened their footing, but they didn't stop. The whistling followed them like it had breath, like it wanted to be heard. And then, through the trees, they saw it, a figure standing ahead, blocking the trail. Tall, wrapped in animal skins. No face, just a mask. A crude, skin-colored mask that looked eerily human. The figure raised one hand and waved. They didn't wait to see what the figure would do next. Nora yanked Dale's arm, and they veered off the trail, pushing through. Dense underbrush and thorny limbs, hearts slamming in rhythm with their boots. Behind them, the whistles turned into something worse. Laughter. Not loud, not wild. Low, measured, cold. It followed them like a predator that wasn't in a rush. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. Finally, they dropped behind a cluster of fallen logs, camouflaged under a mess of moss and dry needles. Nora held her breath, the taste of copper in her mouth, while Dale clutched his gun like a lifeline. Minutes passed. Then a sound, a slow, deliberate footstep nearby. Nora peeked over the log. Nothing, just the forest. Too still, too quiet. Like it had pressed pause on the world. Dale leaned in, whispering, "We need to circle back to the fire pit. There's something out here. I think this place, it's part of something older, like a trap." She nodded, even though her gut screamed against it. They couldn't go back to the car, not without understanding what they were up against, and the only lead they had was back at that clearing. By the time they returned, night was creeping through the trees, making shadows longer, darker. But what stopped them in their tracks wasn't the fire pit. It was the structure. It was gone. Where it had stood hours ago was now just flattened. Earth. No logs, no hide, not even ash. Like it had never been there. Dale turned in a slow circle, eyes wide. No one moves a whole structure like that. Not in hours, not silently. They didn't move it, Nora whispered. They built it for us, a lure. She spotted something in the dirt where the apple had been. A small object, barely visible under a scattering of leaves. She knelt and brushed it off. A necklace, a tiny charm in the shape of a book. Emily's. She'd seen it in photos. Her mother had mentioned it in her statements. Emily never went anywhere without it, and now it was here, placed, like bait. Suddenly, Dale froze. His hand raised slightly, motioning for silence. Then, very slowly, he pointed. Just beyond the clearing, 10 feet into the tree line, something stood, watching, not a person, at least not anymore. It was tall, wrapped in stitched-together hides, its head tilted in a way that was just wrong, as if the neck bones were wrong. And it wore a human face, but not its own. The skin was pale, dried like leather, stretched over something underneath. 2 eye holes, no mouth. Then it moved, not toward them, but sideways, slipping behind the trees like smoke. And that's when they heard it. A voice, clear, human, and broken. "Help! Me!" It came from deeper in the woods. Nora's blood froze. The voice. It sounded like Mark. "Mark!" she shouted before Dale could stop her. The woods echoed it back. "Mark, Mark, Mark!" And then silence again. Dale hissed, "That's not him, that's them. They mimic." Nora stepped back. But the journal. Dale grabbed her arm. We're leaving. Now. We have enough. We have proof. But as they turned, the ground beneath Nora's foot gave out. The earth opened. She fell. Down into blackness, swallowed whole by a hole she never saw coming. She landed hard, her shoulder hitting dirt and stone. Her flashlight flickered. Then steadied. And she wasn't alone. All around her in this underground chamber were symbols, carved deep into the walls, burned into the floor. Bones, human bones, stacked neatly like shelves, and at the far end, a figure, bound, gagged, filthy, eyes wide and wild, still alive. It was Mark Holloway. Mark didn't speak when she first reached him. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, face sunken, beard matted, hands shaking violently as if they'd been doing so for days without rest. He flinched when Nora knelt beside him. Flinched like a man who hadn't seen another human face, a real one in years. Nora cut the ropes around his wrists, careful not to startle him. The room smelled like death and mildew, like something had been rotting beneath the surface for a long, long time. "Mark," she whispered, "it's okay, I'm here, you're safe." He croaked out something, but it wasn't a word, just a sound, animal and hoarse. She leaned in, then he grabbed her wrist with sudden strength, his mouth twisting. "You shouldn't have come." Before she could answer, Dale's voice echoed from above. "Nora, are you all right?" "I found him," she shouted. "He's alive." A rope dropped down a moment later. Dale, always ready, had one in his pack. He tied it to a tree and shimmied down into the hole. As his boots hit the dirt, he froze at the sight of Mark, alive but broken. "Oh my God," he muttered. Mark was sobbing now, his arms wrapped around his knees, whispering over and over again, "They took her. They took her. They wear her." Tarek and Nora knelt in front of him again. "Mark, listen to me. We found Emily's body back near the ridge. Mark shook his head violently. No, that's not her. That's what they left behind, what they shed." Dale stepped forward, jaw tight. "What the hell are you talking about?" "They take people," Mark whispered, rocking slightly. "They take skin. They take faces. Then they wear them and they walk among you like nothing's wrong." Nora stared at him. 4 years, Mark said. 4 years I've been down here. They kept me alive so I could watch, hear them, mimic her voice, hear them laugh with her mouth. She begged me to kill her before they finished, before they completed the process. He broke down again, curling into himself. "They're not people," he said through sobs. "They used to be, but they're something else now, something hollow." Dale looked at Nora, panic, finally, breaking through his mask. "We need to get out of here, now." They rigged the rope, lifted Mark up first. He was weak, barely able to stand, but the adrenaline kept him moving. Nora followed next, Dale last. As they emerged from the earth, night had swallowed the forest whole. The moon hung low and the air felt wrong, thicker, still, and quiet. Too quiet. Dale scanned the tree line. "We need to move, back to the car." They helped Mark along, stumbling through the trees with only flashlights and instinct guiding them. But 20 minutes in, Mark stopped. "Wait," Nora turned. "What is it?" He pointed ahead, trembling. "That's not the way we came. It's the trail." "No," he said, voice firm for the first time. "Look." And then she saw it. Another figure standing motionless in the dark. It looked like a park ranger, tan uniform, flashlight in hand. But the face, it was too smooth, too still. And the smile, frozen, wide, like it had been painted on. Then it spoke. "Are you lost?" it said in Emily's voice. Nora stepped back. "Emily's dead," she whispered. The figure tilted its head. "No, I'm right here." It began to walk toward them, and then another one appeared behind. Then another, silent, slow, moving through the forest like ghosts with borrowed skin. They were surrounded. Mark collapsed, screaming. Dale raised his weapon, firing into the trees, but the shots did nothing. The things didn't even flinch. Nora looked around desperately, then saw it. A split in the trees, a slope, a path they hadn't taken before. She grabbed Mark and Dale, Move, now! They ran, not toward safety, but deeper into the unknown, because behind them the watchers followed, and one of them was still wearing Emily's face. The forest felt endless. Branches lashed at their faces as they ran. Roots reached up like hands, grabbing at their boots. The deeper they went, the less the forest looked like any part of Washington Nora had ever seen. The trees changed, older, thicker, gnarled in shapes that felt unnatural, like they'd grown twisted around screams no one heard. Behind them, the watchers didn't chase with speed. They didn't need to. They moved slowly but with certainty, like they already knew where this would end. Mark tripped and fell hard, landing on his side with a grunt. Nora dropped beside him, trying to pull him up, but his eyes rolled back, completely drained. Dale grabbed both their arms, dragging them into a shallow ravine hidden beneath thick ferns. They lay there in silence, hearts pounding, lungs burning. A figure passed just 10 feet above. Its footsteps made no sound, but they could hear it breathing. Heavy, wet, like something decaying, trying to pretend it was still alive. Then another sound, a voice, but not just any voice. It was Nora's. Dale, Mark, come on. This way. Her own voice. Perfectly copied, Dale's jaw clenched so tight his teeth could have cracked. Mark began to shake again, mumbling the same phrase over and over. They learn, they mimic, they remember. They waited until the footsteps faded. Then Nora whispered, "There's no way out of here, is there?" Mark nodded weakly. "There is. But it's not a trail. It's not marked. You have to go through them." "What does that mean?" "You can't outrun them. You have to face them." Dale shook his head. "That's suicide." But Mark didn't respond. He reached into the torn inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out something small, folded in cloth. He handed it to Nora. Inside was a human tooth, carved, with strange, tiny symbols. "I took it from one of them," he said. "They hated that. It marked me. That's why they didn't kill me. They wanted it back. They wanted me back." Nora stared at the thing in her palm. It felt cold, heavier than it should have been. Then she noticed something else. Engraved, in the center of the tooth, almost too small to see without straining, was a symbol she recognized. It matched one carved onto the inside of the journal's cover. She looked at Dale. This isn't just some tribe of lunatics in the woods. This is a belief system, a ritual, maybe even a religion. Or a cult," he muttered. "Or older." Mark sat up slowly, his voice low. "It started with people, but it didn't end there. They gave themselves to something in the woods, something that needed skins, faces, memories. And what does it want now?" Mark looked at her with hollow eyes. "You." Before she could speak, a new sound shattered the air, a scream, high, human, and close. Nora stood up fast, heart in her throat. That wasn't one of them. That was real. Dale grabbed his flashlight. "We can't ignore it." They moved uphill, following the sound, hearts racing. They expected to find another watcher, another trap, but instead, they found a tent, old, tattered, half-covered, in moss and thyme. Inside was a man, barely alive, thin as bone, duct tape across his mouth, eyes wild with terror. Not Mark, not a stranger, a park ranger. Nora ripped the tape off and he gasped. "They took my partner. They wore his face for months. I watched him come back to the station every day, and it wasn't him. It smiled too much, it blinked wrong, it didn't sweat." He grabbed her hand. "They're in town. They're pretending to be us." Nora's blood ran cold. Mark's voice broke behind her. "They never stayed in the woods. They were always waiting for someone to bring them back." Nora stood frozen. The ranger's words echoed in her mind like a gunshot. "They're in town, pretending to be us." It explained too much. The message to her phone, "Stop digging," the strange figures, the face that wore her voice. If they had already crossed into civilization, no one was safe. The Watchers weren't just lurking in the shadows anymore. They were living among them, and no one could tell the difference. Mark slumped beside the tent, whispering to himself, rocking again. It was never just about us. We were the start, the spark. Dale looked at Nora, breath short. We have to get back to town. We warn the station, the press, hell, the whole damn country if we have to. But Nora wasn't so sure. Something gnawed at her, deep, paralyzing. What if some already were the press, the law, the people they'd turn to for help? And then the worst question of all slithered in. What if someone they trusted already wasn't real? They hiked out in silence. This time the woods didn't fight them. No whistles, no faces, no watchers, just trees and mist. It was almost like the forest was letting them go, or watching to see what they'd do next. They reached the car just past dawn. Mark sat in the back, swaying. Dale took the wheel. Nora rode shotgun, fingers tight around the journal and the carved tooth wrapped in cloth. Her thoughts were static. They pulled into Crescent Falls by 8:30 a.m. quiet, peaceful, the way a small town always looks when something is terribly wrong just beneath the surface. She noticed it immediately. Small things. A kid walking a dog too early for school. A mailman waving with a smile that lasted too long. An old woman at the diner window stirring coffee that had probably gone cold 2 hours ago, watching. They pulled into the precinct parking lot. Nora stepped out, heart pounding. She looked around. Everything seemed normal, familiar. But now she couldn't trust any of it. A deputy opened the door. "Detective Mendez," he called cheerfully. "You're back." Nora nodded but said nothing. He stepped toward them, then paused, eyes narrowing. "Who's that in the back seat?" Mark met his eyes. The deputy tilted his head and smiled. Too wide, too smooth, not enough blink. "You should have stayed in the woods," he said. Then, without warning, the deputy whistled. High, slow, familiar. Within seconds, every person on the street stopped moving. Every single one turned and stared at them. No blinking, no smiling, just watching. Dale yanked Mark from the car. "Back in, we're leaving now." But it was too late. The whole town was no longer a town. It was a mask, a collection of them. One by one, the townsfolk began walking toward them, quiet, steady, smiling. Their faces flickered, skin that rippled like wet paper, eyes that didn't move quite right. Mark began to scream again. "They can't be killed, not unless—" Nora cut him off. "Unless what?" He pointed at the journal, frantic. The ritual, the burning. It's the only thing that keeps them from regenerating. Dale tossed gasoline from the trunk. Nora opened the journal to the last intact page. Handwritten instructions, partly in symbols, partly in shaking words. Bury the skin. Burn the face. Bind the memory. Only then will it stop wearing you. She understood. It wasn't just about killing them. It was about erasing their identity. She doused the journal, the tooth, Emily's charm, the mask she'd ripped off one of them earlier, and set it all on fire in the middle of the precinct parking lot. The flames roared, and all around them the watchers screamed, not with mouths, but from deep within. Their faces melted, cracked, began to fall apart like paper soaked in rain. One by one they dropped, shrinking, collapsing into piles of skin and cloth and nothingness. Then silence. Real silence. The kind of silence the forest had never given them. The kind that meant it was over. Mark stood trembling, eyes wet, shoulders heaving. Dale holstered his weapon, jaw clenched. Nora stared into the fire, the flames licking the sky, the last remnants of whatever they were, turning to ash. But deep inside she knew this wasn't the end, just a reset. Because somewhere another journal waited. Another face would be worn, another voice would be stolen, and somewhere, in the darkest corners of another forest, the watchers were still watching.